My skin condition literally controlled my life. What I wore, what I ate, where I went, how I felt about myself. It was constant. I'm Jen, a clinical hypnotherapist who specialises in helping people manage their chronic skin conditions. And so I just wanted to share my story of how I got here and how hypnotherapy changed my life. So I've had eczema on and off pretty much my whole life, but it never really controlled my life too much. It was manageable. I do remember odd comments, of course, from kids at school. Remember being in year 8 and a boy asking me if I'd been in a fire and if I had burnt my face. Kids. And of course, that stuck with me, and I still remember it clearly today. But on the whole, I was able to do the things I wanted to do. I went to a performing arts school and I did a lot of dance and exercise. And my skin never really held me back. Fast forward to me getting older, when of course most people are growing out of their skin conditions, and my skin got worse and worse. So after university, where I studied marine biology, I went traveling for a year. And I did a lot of hitchhiking and camping around New Zealand and Australia. And it's at that time when my skin really started to dictate how I felt about myself, like what I wore and the things that I was able to do or not do. And I pushed myself to continue anyway, but ended up with a really severe skin infection. Finally ended up seeing a dermatologist who could not believe I'd never seen a dermatologist in England. He told me as soon as I get home, I am to see doctor after doctor until I get a referral. So that's what I did. Once I got home, I eventually got onto the NHS dermatology system and basically just got onto the strongest steroids eventually. So I got given, your standard 1% hydrocortisone and then stepped it up from there all the way until I was on the strongest steroids and they were still barely managing my skin condition. So then I was referred to phototherapy, and I had phototherapy at the hospital about 3 times a week for about 3 months. By this point, I was having to take time off work, and it was really impacting my social life and my intimacy as well with my partner. Unfortunately, phototherapy only worked for about a month, and then it all came roaring back. And at this point, I then went private because I was back on the wait list for dermatology, and I was just so desperate, so uncomfortable all the time. The insomnia started creeping in, and I just needed something. So I went private, and they gave me oral steroids, which completely cleared up my skin for the 6 weeks that I was on them. Of course, once I came off them, my skin went back to being very angry, and now this was like head to toe. And honestly, at this point, I was struggling to wear clothes. Showering was really painful. So I'd pretty much just spend all of my time naked on the sofa, just covered in greasy creams in front of a fan, using ice packs, and also at the same time, hot water bottles. Because although my skin was really hot and inflamed, that meant I was losing all of my body heat. So I was actually quite cold. So I was hot and cold at the same time, just constantly in pain and barely sleeping at all. I was offered Protopic, and I made the personal decision not to use that. And I went for patch testing instead, trying desperately to find the root cause of what was causing all my flares. And that's when I started finding out about topical steroid withdrawal, or TSW. So in the end, I made the decision to stop using all steroids, which were barely working for me anyway at this point, and just wean off them and see what my skin did. And unfortunately, this is when I became pretty much bedbound for about 6 months. I remember describing it to my partner as feeling like C3PO. Like, I would get out of bed and waddle carefully to the bath, but I didn't want to straighten my limbs because I knew that if I did, my skin would just crack and break. So I had to sort of walk in a really awkward robot-like fashion, and then I would just spend as much time as possible in a salt bath because that was the only pain relief that I could find. The skin shedding was unreal. It was just like having to hoover my bed every day, or brush off all of the bedding or the sheets. It was just coming from everywhere. I was avoiding talking to friends. I isolated myself. I wasn't able to do anything. Like cooking, I couldn't stand being in the kitchen because of the heat. That would cause me to itch even more. I couldn't clean the house or help with any household chores because of the chemicals and the movement that was involved. And I started on antidepressants because by then I was obviously in a very low place. I started working with a dietitian and worked on improving my diet in any way that I could, which looked like improving omega oils, healthy fats, leafy greens, and protein. And this did help to a certain extent. I also went to talking therapy. I went through the NHS CBT therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, sex therapy, anything. I was just so desperate for anything that could possibly help me. I mean, the emotional impact of this can't really be overstated. You know, it's impacting everything. I lost my career. I was out of work for a year. Obviously, it was impacting my relationships, my fitness. Before this point, I was training for a second half marathon, and now I could like barely walk up the stairs. In doing so, I'd kind of lost my identity of who I was. You know, I'd lost that connection with my friends. I loved baking and I couldn't do that anymore. I wasn't able to exercise. So I was losing all of these essence that I found made me the person that I was. So then you also have this loss of identity and you fall into a bit of a crisis of who even am I anymore? I don't recognize the person in the mirror physically or even emotionally. Eventually, I got to a point where I felt like I was able to start going back to work. So I just found a normal 9 to 5 office job to help me ease me back into the working world. Unfortunately, what happened is even though my skin was more comfortable than it was by this point, my brain had still built this association between like clothes and showering and pain. So I started having panic attacks. And I'd have them every morning as I tried to get dressed, or if I ever tried to have a shower, trying to get public transport. I was constantly thinking that everyone was looking at me and judging me, and I was just overwhelmed and burnt out. So at this point, I was on the list for the NHS PTSD therapy, but the wait was going to be several months, and I just was at a point where I couldn't even think about getting to the next week, you know, let alone a few months' time. So one of my best friends asked if I'd ever tried hypnotherapy. And I remember laughing and being like, what is that? Some like Derren Brown magic trick, you know, that's not going to help anything. But I was desperate. By this point, I'd also tried cryotherapy and acupuncture, and I was just like, yeah, sure, fine, free consultation. Let's go. What there's nothing to lose. And oh my gosh, it was the first time anyone had ever explained to me how my brain works and why I was thinking in this way, why I was reacting in the way that I was, and the pieces started to fall into place. It was a really different approach because it was based in neuroscience. So she spent time teaching me about my brain and how it works and why it works like that, you know, how we evolved that way. And this meant I started to have more self compassion. I wasn't beating myself up. I was going, oh, okay, I'm reacting that way because my brain's doing that thing where it's trying to protect me. You know, I had a deep understanding of what was actually happening to me. It was also a very forward focused, gentle, positive approach that I hadn't come across before. I was used to having to talk about the trauma and the pain and go over it and over it again and again. Whereas this type of therapy, we weren't going back further than the past week. We were very much focusing on the future and where I wanted to be and where I wanted to get to and how to do that. So this wasn't about trying to fix my skin condition in any way. It was about changing the relationship I had with my skin and gaining back my confidence and the trust in myself that I can deal with this. So I signed up to start hypnotherapy. And literally, after just 6 sessions, I never had a panic attack again. The whole way that I approached problems changed. I started to be a lot more logical rather than emotional. I was able to stay rational and understand what was happening, come up with a solution focused approach, and move forward with that calmness and confidence that I had been searching for years. So yeah, I was still uncomfortable with my skin. I was still itchy and inflamed, and my sleep was inconsistent and sweating was difficult. So I was only able to exercise a minimal amount, but I was able to start finding the joy in life again and starting to feel like myself again. I was able to start experimenting with trying clothes again without that overwhelming fear. I'd got into a place where I believed I could never wear jeans again, for example. I didn't wear jeans for like 2 years. And then through hypnotherapy, I was like, well, I could give it a go. You know, my brain had got into a place where it just thought, no, I can't wear that. But after hypnotherapy, I was like, well, let's try. Let's just wear them for half an hour around the house and then go from there. It started to break things down so that I was able to identify, and carry out these small baby steps to move me forward. And I actually enjoyed therapy. Like, I looked forward to it every week. And it wasn't a sit there and cry and feel overwhelmed about all these things that I was dealing with. It was oh, I want to go and tell my therapist the good stuff that's happened this week. I want to tell her how well I'm doing. And I know that I get to also have a little goal set with me for the following week, and a calming relaxation to calm down my nervous system, teaching my body that it's safe again. So I stopped mirror checking, started wearing new clothes, started socializing again, but all nice and slow baby steps. This shifted my whole life from symptom control to actually being able to live life rather than just surviving. So I actually went from being completely bedbound, being unable to get dressed, let alone leave the house or do work, to going back to uni and deciding to retrain from being a marine biologist to a hypnotherapist, because she had completely changed my outlook on life and myself. Um, and I figured I could help people in the same way. And with my experience having gone through, and I'm still going through, steroid withdrawal, I could also bring a very personal aspect to it for the skin community. Now I am a full-time solution-focused hypnotherapist working online, so I'm fully accessible with any clients with any chronic illness worldwide, and I specialize in helping people manage their skin conditions. I have gone through various medications since then. I was on cyclosporin last year, which gave me about 10, 11 months of clear skin, which was amazing. And then a few months ago, that stopped working for me, and I made the shift from cyclosporin to methotrexate, which is now currently what I'm on. Do I still have skin flares? Yes. Do I still have sleepless nights and feeling discomfort and having to reach for ice packs and the fan and getting frustrated? Yes, of course. But I don't let it dictate and control my life like it once did. It's really easy to fall into that hole of being very isolated and losing hope, really. I think that's what it came down to. Was it's such a long journey. TSW can go on for years, and eczema in general, or any skin conditions, of course, can come and flare throughout your whole life. So because it's such a long journey, I think for many of us, we do start to lose that light at the end of the tunnel. And when you lose that optimism and start to think, oh my God, I'm never going to get better, this is just my life now, that's when you can fall into a really dark place really easily. So in terms of how I feel about my body now, I mean, I love my body. And that maybe feels like a weird thing to say. Now that I've said it out loud, I don't think I've ever said that out loud before. I'm probably the most unfit I've ever been at this point in time, but it's come through so much, and it's still able to do so much. And the thing is, I have a nice relationship with my body with acceptance, because even when I do flare, I'm still grateful for all the things it can do. And when I feel like I can't do certain things, actually, I know that my self worth isn't led by my appearance or my productivity. You know, I'm so much more than my skin and my skin condition. You know, I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, I'm a partner, I'm a baker, a dancer. Um, there's so many more aspects to me rather than just the red, itchy skin that the world might see. I still use hypnotherapy audio tracks most nights, and I still use lots of techniques that my hypnotherapist taught me and techniques that I still share with my clients today. I think it's really important to share the neuroscience of how our brain works because it completely changes the relationship we have with our own behavior and it makes it easier for us to create change. Plus, it's so important to work with the client and find those small baby steps which start to have a domino effect and really add up. We can learn to really celebrate ourselves, even if our goals and our achievements are really small. You know, if they're difficult for us, then nobody else should get to dictate how small these goals seem anyway, because that was hard. So it's an achievement that we did it. I do genuinely feel like I've rewired my brain, and the way that I look at life now is so different. And I have this motivation and this focus now. I feel like I've got my purpose back, and yeah, it's very different from what it was before. And it's okay to grieve that and to grieve the person you were before you went through your chronic illness. Um, to grieve relationships you've lost and opportunities, but it's okay that life looks different now. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to look worse. We just need to find your new path and your new sense of self. So if you feel like your skin is holding you back or holding you hostage in your own life, I promise you it doesn't have to stay this way. You are not broken and this will not be forever. This is temporary. Check the caption on how to connect with me, and I'd love to hear from you.